Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am super excited to share this one with you, mainly because we're talking about a totally bizarre mystery that affects every single human being on Earth. And yes, that includes you. Think about this for a second. You lived an entire, highly complex life before the age of 3. You had a completely distinct existence, full of brand new experiences. But those years, they're a total blank. So why? Well, today we are going to unpack exactly what happened to those missing years. Just think about the massive, life-altering milestones you achieved in your first couple of years. You were born. You opened your eyes to the world for the very first time. You heard your mother's voice. You tasted your first solid food. You took those incredibly clumsy but significant first steps, and you spoke your very first word. Honestly, these are some of the most profound experiences a human being can possibly go through. They are literally the foundational building blocks of your entire existence. But here is the ultimate paradox. You remember none of it. Not a single solitary moment. Now, most people assume the answer to this is pretty simple, right? They figure, oh, well, my brain just kind of wasn't ready yet, it wasn't recording. But that's actually not right at all. Your baby brain was recording everything. Memories were actively being made. The real answer is far, far stranger. Those memories absolutely existed, but something completely destroyed them. Okay, let's dive into this. Back in 1905, Sigmund Freud became the first person to put a formal name to this whole phenomenon. He called it infantile amnesia. Now, the very definition of amnesia implies that memories actually existed in the first place. And today, we know this for an absolute fact. Babies can, without a doubt, form memories. But you might be wondering, how do we know they were actually remembering things, rather than just acting on basic animal instinct? Well, we can look at this incredibly elegant experiment from the 1980s, run by a psychologist named Carolyn Rovey Collier at Rutgers University. She took babies and just simply tied a little ribbon from their ankle to a mobile hanging above their crib. The babies very quickly learned that kicking made the mobile move, and of course they loved it. But here is the critical part, step 3. When she brought those exact same babies back days later, they remembered. They started kicking immediately. Even 2-month-olds could hold on to that memory for a couple of days, and 6-month-olds, they remembered for weeks. So infant brains can absolutely learn, store, and recall information, but those memories just don't make it into adulthood. To understand why, we have to look at our first major suspect. Suspect 1, the underdeveloped hippocampus. Welcome to the very first layer of our mystery. For decades, scientists couldn't really figure out this vanishing act, but they assumed infantile amnesia was purely a structural issue inside the brain itself. The hippocampus is that small, curved structure deep in your brain that acts as the engine of memory formation. Now, in adults, the hippocampus works seamlessly with the prefrontal cortex to tag, store, and retrieve specific episodes, like, say, a birthday party or a walk in the rain. But in infants, the connections between the hippocampus and the cortex are basically still under construction. A key region called the dentate gyrus, which is literally the gateway for new memories, isn't actually fully wired up until somewhere between ages 2 and 4. So this brilliantly illustrates the biological difference. Your infant brain was perfectly capable of forming short-term memories, but it just physically lacked the mature wiring required to move them into permanent long-term storage.
Suspect 2, creation through cellular destruction.
But, as with any good detective narrative, that underdeveloped brain is really only half the story. What comes next is incredibly strange, and it completely revolutionized our understanding of infant memory. In 2014, 2 neuroscientists in Toronto, Sheena Jocelyn and Paul Frankland, introduced a hypothesis that sounded almost absurd at the time. They asked, what if the very process that builds your brain is also what destroys your memories? It's a massive plot twist. The idea that your brain's own growth is exactly what wiped your slate clean. Let me explain how this actually works. It all comes down to a biological process called neurogenesis. In the first few years of your life, your hippocampus is producing brand new neurons at a truly extraordinary rate. And this rapid growth is absolutely essential because those new brain cells are busy wiring up the permanent circuits that you're going to use for the rest of your life. But Jocelyn and Franklin suspected there was a huge hidden cost to this. Every single time a new neuron integrates into an existing circuit, it disrupts the older connections that were already there. And those disrupted connections, they were the exact ones holding your earliest memories. Now, what's really interesting here is the totally counterintuitive conclusion they reached by running experiments on mice. When they artificially increased neurogenesis, that rapid, explosive neuron growth in adult mice, those adults suddenly started forgetting things they had previously learned. And inversely, when they artificially slowed down neurogenesis in infant mice, those infants held onto their memories way longer than normal. The conclusion, which they published in the journal Science, was fascinating. Your baby brain wasn't too weak to hold on to memories. It was just too busy growing. It's exactly like building new rooms and tearing down old walls. The massive explosion of new neurons required to build your powerful adult brain quite literally overwrote the memories stored inside it. Your earliest experiences weren't lost because they were never saved. They were physically demolished by your own brain's massive construction project.
Suspect 3, the birth of you.
But biology isn't the only culprit in this nested mystery. We also have to look at the psychological layer. To form what scientists call an autobiographical memory, the kind of memory where you can actually replay an experience in your head, you need a main character. And that main character has to be you. In the late 1990s, developmental psychologists Mark Howe and Mary Courage argued that this was a critical missing piece. You have to possess a continuous sense of self. You have to actively understand that you exist as a distinct person, totally separate from the world around you, and that things are happening to you. Let's move to the classic mirror test and see how this builds. If you put a little dot of rouge on a baby's nose and place them in front of a mirror anytime before 18 months of age, they treat the reflection just like another child. They literally have no idea it's them. But look what happens at the 18 to 24-month mark. Suddenly, they recognize the reflection and they reach up for the mark on their own face. This exact window, the birth of self-recognition, perfectly tracks with the absolute earliest age that autobiographical memories can begin to form. There was no narrator inside your head packaging experiences into a neat little story because, psychologically speaking, there was no you yet.
Suspect 4, the language of memory.
And this brings us to our final missing piece of the puzzle, language. Based on years of research by developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson, we now know that before you could speak, your early experiences were encoded purely as raw sensory impressions. It was just a chaotic wash of sounds, textures, emotions, and light. But post-language memories are totally different. Nelson found that language doesn't just describe our memories to other people, it actively gives our memories a structural skeleton. Once children begin speaking and actually having conversations with adults about past events, stuff like, hey, remember when we went to the park today? Their ability to form lasting memories improves dramatically. Language provides the structural framework required for lasting storage. I love this powerful visual metaphor. Experiences without words are basically like water with no container. Without the conversational framing and the structural organization that language provides, infant experiences just pool in the moment and then they slip away entirely. So the crucial point here is actually backed up by cultural data from Cornell psychologist Chi Wong. The average age of your earliest memory actually varies depending on your culture's relationship with language and storytelling. In Western cultures, where parents frequently narrate their children's experiences, the earliest memories start right around age 3.5. But look at the Maori people of New Zealand. Their oral tradition places a massive emphasis on personal history and rich storytelling, and their average first memories reach all the way back to age 2.5. Meanwhile, in some East Asian cultures where early narratives focus a bit less on the individual, first memories start closer to age 4 or even later. So, cultural emphasis on storytelling actually shifts our biological memory limits. How crazy is that?
So, bringing this all together, what really happened to your missing years? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was everything all at once. Your hippocampus physically wasn't ready for long-term storage. And even when it started to get ready, the massive flood of neurogenesis completely destroyed your early memory circuits. On top of that, you had no continuous concept of self to anchor your experiences to, and you had absolutely no language to provide a structural framework. Your brain wasn't failing. It was simply doing something far, far more important than remembering. It was incredibly busy destroying the person who came before in order to become you.
Which leaves us with this final, truly mind-bending question to think about. If you had no continuous sense of self, and the physical brain that held your earliest experiences literally rewired itself beyond recognition by tearing down its own walls, is the baby in your old photos actually you? Or is it someone else entirely? Someone who lived in the exact same body but whose mind was disassembled and rebuilt, neuron by neuron, into the person watching this explainer today? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredibly deep topic. I hope this gave you a whole new perspective on your own mind.